Okay, welcome everybody to this exciting panel on implementing the DMA, Digital Markets Act, for those who haven't heard of it. And I think it's great to have this excellent set of panelists here. To save time, I will just give a quick introduction to all four of them in the order of appearance. And then I would give the floor for some introductory statements. Let me start with Sophie Ahlswede, who is a financial economist with long experience in the private sector, in academia and EU public administration. And she is currently at the newly created team in DG Comp dealing with digital platforms and the implementation of the Digital Markets Act. Second will be Alexandre De Streel, who is academic director of the Digital Research Program at the Brussels Think Tank Center on Regulation in Europe, professor of European Law at the University of Namur and visiting professor at College of Europe and Sciences Po Paris. He also chairs the expert group on the online platform economy, advising the European Commission, and is, since you have a lot of spare time, also a part-time judge at the Belgian Competition Authority. Alexandre has commented widely on the DMA. His main research is regulation and competition policy in the digital economy, as well as legal issues raised by the developments of artificial intelligence. However, Alexandre does not always choose his co-authors wisely. He has co-authored work with me. Victoria Robertson is a professor at the Vienna University of Economics and Business. There she heads the Competition Law and Digitalization Group. She's also professor of international antitrust law at the University of Graz and course director of the Competition Policy and Digital Markets course at the College of Europe. And she's director of the Competition Law Hub. Her current research focuses on the application of competition law in digital markets environments. And Cristina Caffarra is managing partner and head of Keystone Europe since last summer. And she is very active commenting on the Digital Markets Act, and I hope we will have that discussion now. I think it would be nice if we start with Sophie to provide us with a quick overview, and not from a far distance, but looking at it more closely, what that means within the next 1 to 2 years. Thanks.
Okay. Hello. Oh, that's a bit loud. Can you hear me still? Yeah. So my name is Sophie Ahlswede. I work in the European Commission in DG Competition in the Directorate for Digital Platforms that is in charge of implementing the DMA together with DG Connect. So this is a joint effort of 2 Directorates General in the Commission. And I will briefly introduce you to objectives, concepts, and the architecture of the DMA, and introduce you to some jargon that makes it then easier for the other speakers to use that on you. So the DMA, as you may know or not know, is the result of actually a worldwide reflection process on the challenges raised by digital market gatekeepers, not just in the area of competition, but we're focused today on competition. Which has led to a consensus in principle that there needs to be some kind of a regulatory tool apart from antitrust enforcement to preserve competition and innovation in those markets. Anyway, so this reflection process is still ongoing in a couple of major jurisdictions, but the EU is the first one to have actually passed a law on this. This was proposed by the European Commission in December 2020 and then came into force on the 1st of November 2022. And the actual applicability starts on the 2nd of May this year. The problems identified and that are intended to be remediated by the DMA are driven by the characteristics of digital platform markets, which are driven by First, the extreme scale economies that these markets exhibit. Second, the strong network effects by connecting many business users with end users. And third, by increasing vertical integration in those markets, which lead to unrivaled data accumulation. So a small number of super powerful players has emerged in those markets, and the many antitrust enforcement cases are a testament to their behavior in those markets, and yeah, which led, it's a development that led to the DMA. Now I will start my presentation, as in some slides. Oh no, sorry, that was too fast. So the objectives of the DMA are twofold. First is to ensure contestability and fairness of digital markets. And the second one is actually to enhance coherence and legal certainty in the EU, because those services are provided across borders and there's no point in having regulatory frameworks on a national basis. So that is also why the legal basis in terms of the treaty article is actually an internal market treaty article, not a competition law, traditional competition law article. That said, antitrust enforcement in this area is not dead. And the two instruments will certainly be used in tandem, because they are actually having complementary but specific objectives. As you know, the objective of antitrust is undistorted competition, and the DMA's focus is really on contestability. So in terms of scope, the DMA is focused on 10 core platform services, or we refer to them as CPSs as well. You will hear that acronym later. I will not list them now, you're aware of them anyway. They're basically the services provided by the big digital market players. The companies that are addressed by this legislation are so-called gatekeepers, and they're defined by 3 criteria. First, they need to have a significant impact on the internal market. Second, they have to provide a core platform service, which is an important gateway for business users to reach end users. And third, they need to enjoy an entrenched or durable position in the market, or have to have a foreseeably entrenched position. And those criteria are measured by certain quantitative thresholds. So if a company exceeds those thresholds, then it is presumed to be a gatekeeper and can be designated as a gatekeeper on a quantitative basis. And this quantitative presumption is rebuttable. So the gatekeeper can submit arguments why, despite meeting those thresholds, they are not actually an important gateway. But this rebuttal possibility is extremely narrow and can only be used on an exceptional basis, and will only be accepted on an exceptional basis. There's also the possibility for the Commission to designate gatekeepers on qualitative criteria, which is, however, a longer process involving a market investigation. So this is going to be used in cases where companies do not meet the thresholds, but are nevertheless perceived as possibly complying with these criteria. So in terms of what happens after designation, there is a list of do's and don'ts in the DMA in Articles 5 to 7 that clearly specifies certain conduct, access to certain, let's say assets, and certain behavior of the gatekeeper. Some of these are directly applicable, all the ones in Article 5, and everything that is in Article 6 can be further specified and will need to be further specified, either upon the request of the gatekeeper, or the Commission can, on its own initiative, specify these obligations further. And in terms of timeline or next steps, so as I said, we're currently just ahead of applicability on the 2nd of May. From the 2nd of May, gatekeepers will have 2 months to notify their core platform services to the Commission. And then the Commission has 45 days to designate those gatekeepers and list the core platform services in its designation decision. And then from the date of the designation decision, the gatekeepers have 6 months to comply with the obligations in the DMA. So it's an extremely tight time frame for compliance for some of those obligations, considering what they entail. And then looking a bit beyond what happens after January to March 2024, depending on when they notify, we will have certainly starting in late 2023 some market investigations, either be it for qualitative designation or because of rebuttals. Non-compliance will probably be later. We will have possibly some specification requests or decisions, and there will be compliance reporting from whenever that kicks in, March 2024 and beyond, that will then put the Commission more into the position of monitoring and supervising the obligations and further specifying the obligations. So I hope this is a good preparation for now the other speakers to continue and provide more insights on what this means.
Thanks for putting us into this position that we are now not yet experts, but know a little bit more. And I suggest that perhaps Alexandre, you continue covering a little bit what are the kind of enforcement principles which should be used when thinking about, well, how to implement the DMA.
Yes, so thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. So the first thing I wanted to say before going to enforcement, because I think it's important, is what really the DMA is about. Because, you know, I go to a lot of conferences and everyone has his own take on the DMA, you know. So first, I think it's not just speedy antitrust, because, you know, sometimes people say, yes, it's just to accelerate antitrust. And yes, it was part of the rationale, the political rationale to do that. And indeed, you know, with regulation, at least after a while, because, you know, there will be a lot of uncertainty at the beginning, but that's normal in a lot of cases. But I mean, once the things are a little bit settled, normally regulation tends to be quicker than antitrust. But it's not just that, because, you know, in the different obligation that you were referring to, I think the idea is to open the platform and the data to stimulate choice and innovation. I think that's, if I had to summarize, you know, really what the DMA is about. And, you know, antitrust is not very good at opening. You know, it's good at prohibiting, but it's not very good at opening. So that's why I don't think it's just a speedy antitrust. It's not also public utilities law, you know, because also some people say the DMA is like, you know, the telecom or the energy regulator or the water regulation, where really the idea is that you have a strong monopolist, and this monopolist will never be displaced. And so what you have to do is to regulate that utilities for the user or the complementers, but you don't hope to change the utilities provider so much. And I think the DMA is not that, because I think we will assess the success of the DMA in the sense that the market will be shaken by new players, not ossify with the existing gatekeeper. So at the end of the day, you know, I see the DMA as a pro-competitive regulation. So it's not just speedy antitrust, it's not public utilities, it's pro-competitive regulation. It's something which aims to create competition, and hopefully with that more competition, you will have more innovation. Now, the second point I wanted to make is your job, and you know, it will be extremely complicated. Why? Because we have to enforce a law in a complex environment. And in a way, you know, the DMA is one example of how you enforce law in a complex environment. And what is good is that the OECD has adopted 2 years ago an interesting recommendation on agile regulation, where I think you have a good principle of how you enforce regulation in a complex environment. And I think there are three main principles that I want to develop here, and which are contained in the DMA. The first and probably the most important one is participation. So of course, the Commission will not be able to do it alone. In a way, you know, the Commission will have to orchestrate an ecosystem of enforcement and compliance. So, you know, they are regulating orchestrator, but maybe they have to learn from the role of the gatekeeper in the way they work. And so to do that, you know, the process should maximize the incentive, the benefit of participation, and maximize the cost of obstruction. And I think, you know, in the way the Commission will enforce that, I think it's very important to give the incentive to everyone to participate, because it's always very good to say, okay, we want participation, but if there is no incentive, it will not happen. So for the gatekeeper, I mean, they will have to produce a compliance report every year, and this compliance report should explain how the gatekeeper will enforce the DMA obligation. Now, what you will have in that compliance report, which will be seen by the Commission, but you will have a non-confidential version, which will be seen by all of us, would be absolutely key, you know. And I think it's very important that the gatekeeper explain what they changed and what they expected from their change, you know. And then you can have some kind of quantitative indicators per obligation to focus the discussion on whether it works or it doesn't work. The second thing is the business user, you know, the Spotify, the Epic, or the small app developer, which will benefit from that, from the DMA. And it's very important, and the Commission is already doing it by having run a number of workshops, that they are heard. But the problem I see sometimes is that every business user come with its own demand, you know, and so I think you will have to have a process of aggregating those demands, you know, because if you hear those workshops that the Commission has run, which are extremely useful, everyone is asking for a different thing, you know, and of course the gatekeeper cannot please everyone, so they will have to choose. And I think the gatekeeper, but that may raise an issue of collusion, so there is a tension there, but the business user should organize among themselves to have a common demand. And then the third is the member states authority. So one thing which is very particular in the DMA is that the Commission is becoming the regulator. And in terms of EU integration, I think that's a big move independently of the big tech, because for the first time of its history, the Commission become a fully fledged regulatory authority, not only a trade authority or an antitrust authority, which has always been, but also a regulator. You know? So it's a big step for the EU integration, but it raises also some issue about independence of the Commission, because of course the Commission is independent from the member states, but the Commission is not politically independent. And I see more and more a tension between the willingness of the Commission to become geopolitical, and I think it's a good thing, and at the same time in this regulatory role. But setting that aside, I think the member states authority will be important in supporting the Commission in doing its job. And I hope even here, the German authority, which as we know, not always agree with the Commission on what needs to be done in the digital market, will play the thing. And we have a good blueprint with financial regulation, you know. In fact, the first European regulator has been created 10 years ago after the financial crisis, where the significant banks in Europe are regulated by the European Central Bank, but the European Central Bank staff is always putting a joint investigation team with national regulatory authority to do their job. And I've heard that Olivier Gerson, the Director General, want to have that model, which I think is very good. So first thing is participation. I'm nearly done. So the second thing is experimentation. So the good thing with digital, you know, technology is that the cost of experimentation has decreased, you know. So I think it would be very important before, because you were explaining that the Commission has to specify, so to give a little bit more detail on some of the obligation of the DMA, I think it would be very important, and I think the Commission intends to do that, to do A/B testing of different option of specification, you know, and then either the Commission asks to the gatekeeper to do this form of A/B testing, or the business user is doing it for the Commission, and on the basis of the information that the Commission has got, decide what's the best remedy. The second thing, and it is provided specifically in the DMA, is that if a specification do not work, in the sense do not deliver, then the Commission can change it, can re-specify the obligation. And then the third thing, which is probably the most difficult one, but very important as well, is to use artificial intelligence technique to improve the operation of the Commission. So, you know, this is developing in particular in financial regulation or financial supervision, you know, they are developing what's called subtech, you know, supervisory technology, to help the financial regulator to process the number of data they have to process, and I think and then take decision. And I think the Commission will be well advised also to develop those kind of technique to improve their own operation. So in the end, you know, participation, experimentation, use of artificial intelligence. In fact, that's what the gatekeeper do, and that's how they are so successful. So maybe, you know, the Commission should be inspired by those companies.
Thanks, Alex. So perhaps I guess your focus was mostly on how to implement Articles 5 to 7, and perhaps also the role a bit of the national authorities, which we could dig deeper if we want to. There's a bit more in the DMA, and perhaps Victoria could tell us a little bit about well, what to do beyond those Articles 5 to 7.
Okay, good afternoon from my side. So what I will do is focus on 3 issues that I think will be central to the enforcement of the DMA. And it's not Articles 5, 6, or 7. And I have them here on the slide because maybe not everybody brought their DMA. So what the Commission did, and Alexandre already mentioned it, is it brought together stakeholders for workshops on the question of enforcing the DMA for certain provisions in December of last year, and then in February and March of this year. And what you could see there is quite stark asymmetries between the gatekeepers or the potential gatekeepers and those business users that will hopefully benefit from this new law. And in the substantive discussions, when we discussed, well, what kind of obligations will Articles 5, 6, and 7 impose on the gatekeepers, we quickly turned to one provision, and that's the one you see on the slide, Article 13, which is an anti-circumvention. And it says the gatekeeper shall ensure that the obligations of Articles 5, 6, and 7 are fully and effectively complied with. And then paragraph 4, the gatekeeper shall not engage in any behavior that undermines this effective compliance. And it shouldn't be, so this undermining should not happen either on a contractual level, commercial level, technical level, and not through behavioral techniques or interface design. And as we move into, well, designation, but then also enforcement of the obligations and specification, I think this is an article we'll increasingly turn to, simply because there's quite a few questions on how this may play out when we look at individual obligations. So let's look at an example, Article 5.5 of the DMA, which says that end users should be given a choice to access their content or subscription through the through the CPS, so the Central Platform Service, even where they acquired it elsewhere. So for example, if I buy an ebook on the website of my app provider, then I should be able to read this ebook on the app that I have installed through the App Store, for example, on the Apple App Store. And right now, this is not always possible. Now, there are lots of questions connected to that. For example, is this kind of access free of charge? Because it doesn't say that in Article 5.5, or will there be a fee structure imposed on this behind? For example, like right now, if you download or make subscriptions through the Apple App Store, Apple usually gets a 30% commission on this. So will this change? Can the App Store adjust its fee structures, and how will it do that to ensure compliance with this provision? Another thing is that in order to be able to read this ebook, of course, there will be certain authorization or registration procedures necessary. But how far does the App Store, or should the App Store then go in those? Where could it create friction to make us users not want to use this option? Would it, for example, be allowed that it displays a pop-up message saying, you're downloading content that you didn't acquire through the safe space of the App Store. Are you sure you want to do this? Because these kind of things matter for users. So this is why I think Article 13 will come into play as we move on into really understanding what those obligations are actually about. Another provision that I think will be very relevant in another area is Article 14 of the DMA. Article 14 is about an obligation to inform about concentrations. So to give you a little background, although there were some presentations already today and yesterday on big tech acquisitions, but we've had over 800 big tech acquisitions over the last few years. One was stopped, MetaGIF in the UK, but there have been many that were not stopped. And we do witness in digital markets a rising concentration of those markets, of course, because of network effects, tipping effects, and so on, but also because of those shopping sprees that many big tech companies went on. And sometimes the European Commission cannot even review those mergers based on the EU merger regulation. Now, in Austria and Germany, we introduced a transaction value threshold to take account of that, but in the EU, we don't have that. So here, this is where Article 14 comes into play. And we have to see it as an addition to our EU merger regulation. And what it says is that gatekeepers have to inform the Commission if they intend to acquire another company that is involved in a core platform service or any other service in the digital sector, or that enables the collection of data. So very broad. But this is not a notification as we're used to it under the merger regulation, it's an information. And then the Commission will inform the competent authorities. So the way it'll look like is like this. The gatekeeper will inform the European Commission, I intend to buy this startup, let's say. The European Commission will inform the competent national authorities and will also publish this information, by the way. And the national authorities then have the possibility to refer this type of merger back to the European Commission and make it competent to review it. And this works based on Article 22 of the EU merger regulation, which provides for such a possibility. Now, there has the Commission in the past was not very happy or would not accept referrals if the national authority under its national law was not competent to review the merger. But it has now changed its practice in this area, and in 2021 published this communication that you see here on the slide on Article 22, and is now actually encouraging national authorities to refer mergers, especially in big tech and pharma, if they see there's really union-wide significance. So this will mean more scrutiny of digital mergers by the European Commission, thanks also to the DMA and the merger regulation. So the next step would then be adapting theories of harm, but we can't go into that today, but I think there's a lot to be said about that as well. Final point on enforcement is private enforcement. I mean, of course, we know that the Commission will be the primary enforcer of the DMA, supported by the national authorities. But what about private enforcement? We've been pushing for this in antitrust law for many years now, and especially the Commission, of course. And you do see a foreshadowing of private enforcement in Article 39 DMA, where it says national courts shall not give a decision which runs counter to Commission DMA decisions. So this means, okay, there could be national court decisions on this. This rule only makes sense if national courts actually rule on the DMA, and this could happen in a damages claim or also in injunctions. And for that, national legislators will have to pave the way. And in fact, we're in Germany today, and you're actually preparing this already. So the German proposal for an 11th amendment of the German Competition Act actually seeks to extend the privileges that exist for damages for competition law infringements, also to DMA infringements. And this might be a path that other legislators might want to take as well. So there's no obligation to do that under the DMA, but it's a possibility to also complement the public enforcement with some private enforcement that might make the DMA more enforceable in practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. So we had two lawyers talking about the DMA obligations and the broader picture. And it doesn't apply to everybody in the audience, but to a number of us. Where is the economics?
Well, quite.
Cristina.
So thank you so much for having me. As the private sector speaker on this panel, I need to start with the obligatory disclosures, because of course you have academics, you have the Commission, but I'm the only private sector speaker. And just to frame that, my disclosures are that I worked systematically against Google in multiple cases, all of the cases before the Commission, cases again by Texas, cases by Colorado and Nebraska. I worked against Facebook. I was the expert of the FTC matter within. So that you don't think I'm an apologist for big tech, then flip it on the other side. I work for Amazon, I worked for Apple, I worked for Microsoft and Uber and many others. So I think it's important to set the scene on substance. I will talk about the economics in a minute, but I want to just take a step back and offer some more some personal sort of considerations about this whole thing, which of course goes without saying is an incredible democratic project. Okay, no one can dispute that the way in which the European Parliament and the Commission, of course, drove this project through in record time, at record speed, is an amazing achievement for us Europeans. And it is something that distinguishes us and we should be proud of in many ways, because it is not what's happening in the US. In the US, you will not see regulation. It's not going to happen on the Hill. So this is something I think which is important and needs to be said at the beginning. That said, the real big question is, you know, of course, how did this come about, and does it have really the prospect of doing anything? And I'm in the skeptic camp. The reason is that if you think about it, how it came about because of a total utter failure of antitrust enforcement. And don't take it personally. I'm not saying that anyone wasn't trying very hard. Everyone tried very hard and did the best, and it was an incredible effort on the part of regulators. But there are inherent problems. One is the timing of these things. It is grotesque. I've been involved in the Google shopping case, in the Google Android case. I've been involved in Amazon. I've been involved in Apple from the beginning. This case has gone on for 7 or 8 years because the parties game it, because the parties keep saying, I want an extension of another 1.5 years. Then the regulator goes into a hole, doesn't appear for another 1.5 years, and on it goes. So in terms of the timing, these things have failed dramatically. And in terms of the remedies, they failed dramatically, because of course, what we told these people in Google Shopping, in Google Android, don't do it again. And of course, to your point about no circumvention, there is also some language about non-circumvention, and they circumvent happily morning to evening. So this is stuff that really comes out of a complete failure. So what do? We need to design this law, and then we have a pile of decisions, the very decisions that we fail to implement or fail to make good, the kind of projects that are underway, and we distill the draftsmen for the law. Probably there wasn't another way to do it, but distill the number of do's and don'ts that were taken from those very decisions, those very cases that they failed to deliver, okay? So you then have a series of do's and don'ts, which are essentially, if you squint, you can recognize this is actually shopping. This is actually Android. This is actually Amazon data. This is App Store. This is Spotify. But in fact, is a kind of attempt to just lift it up to a level of generality. And then there's a big discussion about fairness and contestability as being the absolutely guiding principle. Frankly, no one cared. No one cared one iota in the real world about that discussion. It was an academic discussion. It didn't have any practical implications. The issue, my problem with all of this has always been twofold. Number one, that in the attempt to extract from specific cases up to a level of generality, there was not enough specificity. If you tell companies, thou shalt not self-preference, you can say, what do you mean? What is self-preferencing depending on the various business models that are in play, depending on the incentives? Is it every case that Amazon generates a recommendation for its own product in the buy box, a form of self-preferencing? Frankly, no. So how do we define it? How do we distinguish it in various ways? Two, what are we really doing? Because, you know, the rules did not include the possibility of breakup. Only if you're really, really, really naughty and you really do bad stuff multiple times, maybe perhaps with the wind behind, we will consider breakup, which will never happen. Merger control. You say rightly, Vicky, that Article 14 says you shall notify the Commission. Okay, you know what the companies are thinking? Okay, have a notification, I'll write you something. But it doesn't amount to anything which is practically and concretely going to increase the dismal record of enforcement in merger control in this sector, to my mind. And then there is the implementation, which is going to be a massive, massive issue of resourcing, that I do not see as being soluble, in fact. Now, thinking about these issues, number one, the lack of specificity. I think the Commission, to be positive, is making some progress in trying to make things more specific, because the workshop that Vicky alluded to are actually fairly specific to individual business models. So there was one that was effectively Google. There was one that was effectively Amazon. There was one that is Apple. okay, Apple and Google. So you're going to get a little bit more specific now into business model, because a discussion of self-preferencing in general is a total waste of time, unless you tell me which business model you have in mind and how does that happen. And then I think, so that's progress. Implementation. So far, of course, it's been a very legal process, as we heard, because it is a lawyer's paradise. There is no economics and no technology. That is scary as hell to me, because you have these highly named discussions about how you're actually going to progress towards the designation. And it is super interesting to see how different companies are approaching this. Because if you're Google and Facebook, you want a designation which is as broad as you possibly can, because you want to be able to share all the data between your various activities, right? You don't have to be worried about limitations in segmenting the data. If you're Apple, you want to say, wait a minute, there is an app store, there is an iOS, the iPad is different. You want a much more salami slicing approach. So it's interesting how companies are pursuing it. In this discussion, there is absolutely no economics, and perhaps it isn't intended to be, but it is high time that we need to think about how we're going to go in substance, because lawyers, of course, peer on the letter of the law and what does it mean? But I worry about what are we going to do when it comes to things like access. So all this fuss about fairness and contestability. Okay, it's contestable. Open up the App Store. Go in. Let someone put what? A store inside. Exactly on what terms? Because I think that no one can be delusional enough to think that the app, that iOS or Apple is the free highway to the internet. Okay, so there is tools, there is distribution, there is discoverability, there is stuff that they offer, and that needs to be remunerated. Even Jean Tirole writes about, is it efficient component pricing rule? It's FRAND. What is it going to mean? There has been no real thinking about this so far, but this is super important, because it is going to be the only meaningful discussion that's going to be had in this whole thing. You cannot say to a company which has got a vision of itself, which is integrated for very strongly held business and technological reasons, go open yourself up for no defined money and go and counter your view of safety, security, integrity. Do you think that we can tell these people how to design a business model and to open up the technology in ways that are completely contrary to grain without the competencies to do so? Because there isn't a single technologist anyone can talk to. When you talk about things like, you want to be on, you have a game and you want to be seen. You're a developer with a game. Okay, so you don't like to pay the 30% or whatever it is that Apple charges. I'm not defending it. It is the business model that currently operates. So you can go through the browser. You don't like it because, of course, then you're not discoverable. So Apple says, yeah, but you don't want to just be on the App Store and you want to be discoverable because you want me to put you on the list if you're not paying me anything. So kind of a problem. So I think that these things need to be understood. These businesses are not in the business of, oh, well, the freeway, we are opening up and everything is going to be completely available and accessible. There is going to be tools and marketing services and payment services that need to be addressed and paid. So I think all of that is very much what's ahead of us. I think there is a ton of thinking and work to be done to really understand not just the business model and how these companies make money and why, if you just tell them, oh, drop 30%, they're going to say, you must be joking. What do I do instead? This is how it is constructed. If you just tell them, if you are going to open up, then it's irrelevant that you worry about integrity and all of these things. We will decide what is the level of security that you need to operate on your platform. That is not good enough. And you need a dialogue, not with economists and lawyers. We will not come out of it alive. There need to be economists, lawyers, and technologists talking about this stuff, because otherwise it's a complete free-for-all madness. And my prediction is that this thing is going to end up in Luxembourg for the next 10 years, and nothing will change other than at the margin. There will be a little bit more fairness, a little bit more contestability. There will be a little bit of that, a little bit of this. When it comes to really dispersing power, really creating alternative challengers, this does nothing. I'll leave it here.
I would like to return to Sophie and, well, I mean, the act is there as it is, right? So in the end, we have been discussing, there may be some updates at some point. So I guess there's good reason to continue complaining. But there's also a way, at least for you and the people at the commission, you have to do something. And I'm wondering in particular how you envision the interaction, not just with the gatekeepers, but with the other relevant players in those ecosystems. I mean, you have had the workshop, but is that something you want to, which is going to happen now over the next years? Is that the kind of engagement, or is there more? Yeah, how will you get hopefully useful information out of the market participants?
So I think there's several ways forward. I mean, the workshops were a first format that we chose to basically broaden the discussion a lot more, because we have obviously bilateral meetings with potential gatekeepers that come to us and already engage. But we wanted to open the discussion to third parties, to potential beneficiaries of the obligations, to academics, to have a broad discussion. So this format, I'm not certain whether it will continue in this way or whether it will move potentially to like more closed formats where there's more concrete talk about actual solutions, which potentially need a bit more confidentiality, I presume. So this might change and evolve as we get closer to actually implementing and discussing implementation of the obligations. Then the DMA actually provides for a number of occasions where the gatekeeper has to provide information in a non-confidential way that we can then publish and consult on. So I think that's a good step. And that's where we will involve people outside in writing, so to say, in written consultations, which will help us a lot, I think, and hopefully that will gather a lot of engagement and input that we will need.
Thanks. Just a very quick question to Alexandre, since you may have, of course, you have some biased incentives there, but is there any role for the expert group on the online platform economy you see in this context, or you think time is over?
Yeah, I mean, not so much for the expert group, because the expert group that the Commission has set up 4 years ago, I think, to help in thinking about platform regulation or what to do with platform economy. I think the idea was before the big decision around the DMA and the DSA, and in a way, you know, as Cristina was mentioning, I mean, there was this democratic process which accelerated a lot with the von der Leyen Commission. But if I may, I just want to react on 2 points that Cristina was making. So it's true that it is a difficult process, but I mean, we don't start from nowhere. I mean, we had already in other industry, we had open infrastructure in telecom, in open banking, and so on. So I think we can learn, and I mean, there is a lot of people doing PhD here or postdoc, and I think really the findings that we have in regulatory theory, and maybe regulatory theory will become fashion again, you know. So that's one thing. So yes, there is a lot of question on price and how you organize that access, and it's true technologies will have to be involved in that discussion. But I think we have been there before, and you know, the alternative was what? The alternative was breaking them up. I personally think it's not a good thing, because there is a lot of ecosystem effect which are positive, and I think in any case politically it was unenvisageable that the European Commission decides decide, or the European Parliament and the Council decide to break up some US star firm. I don't think politically it was possible, but we may disagree on that. But I think even economically it would not make sense. So I think, you know, this is the second best. But I agree with you. This is a lot of issue to be discussed, but we don't start from nowhere. And then the last point I wanted to make, because you touched on that, is the role of the court. And yes, there. I hope the court will not make the process too complicated. And the court can make the process complicated on substance if, you know, it used this kind of antitrust methodology implicitly in assessing what the commission does. I mean, clearly it should not do it, and the DMA is clear, but, you know, if you have judges which have their own, you know, operating system in a way, and are used to judge the commission when it does antitrust decision, it would be very important that the judge understand that it's a very difficult, different exercise. And then on procedures, because you know, under the name of due process, no, sometimes you make the life of the enforcer and the commission particularly impossible. You know, so what I really hope is that the court will be reasonable, and this is why I think this discussion on objective is not just theoretical. I mean, it may help also to focus the mind of the judges on what really needs to be achieved. So, you know, I'm maybe a bit less pessimistic than you. But I think now we have that, and I think it's probably the second best, and I don't see any other better solution to some.
Can I just answer one thing? I mean, I keep hearing this the whole time. We've got this president, we've got telecoms, we've done it in electricity. That's fine. I mean, fine. The difference is that if you think about telcos across Europe, Deutsche Telekom, Telecom Italia, France Telecom, you name it, they had more or less the same business model, fixed, broadband, and mobile, or no mobile. And the asset base was common, the business model was common. And so there was a common project, which was how do we open up this fixed or this big capital network in a way that made sense. And I'm not saying that was easy. That was difficult and took years. Here you're looking at something with completely different business model, monetization, approaches, history, and incentives fundamentally. So I don't think that telecoms regulation gives me anything to go on, almost nothing. The issue is, you know, if you take an integrated platform like Apple, and you know, I'm just putting the case there, I'm not advocating for them, but their view is we have a particular unified view of technology and integrity and a business model that isn't unchangeable, but it is designed to monetize in a certain way. If you, regulator, want us to do things differently, beware that you're touching upon multiple sensitive points that are specific to us. You can change the way you monetize, fine, but no one is going to come out of this free, because there isn't a free lunch, because there isn't a situation in which apps will pay zero. They pay zero today, 85% of apps pay zero, and only a very small number pays a lot. And if I were one of them, I'd be pissed off, but it doesn't change the fact that 85% pay zero. So many of those who pay zero will have to pay a lot more, because we don't want people to say, okay, so it's all for free. So all of this is specific. Much of it is about rent sharing, because of course, if you're a developer, you worry about, I'm creating value on this platform. What is the basis upon which I'm going to be sharing the value? This is nothing like telecoms. And so I think it needs serious thinking. And I'm not saying there is a better way. I don't have a clear model in mind. But when we sort of peer on the letter on the law and we say, oh, Article 5.4 says the gatekeeper shall not do this, my mind completely blows. Because I think, what are we thinking? What are we understanding of what's behind the particular business model and the decisions that have led us here? And who is competent to have that discussion at a technological and business level? That is my question.
Victoria, I would like to ask you, so I mean, there may be some implementation problems, maybe some. There may be things which are perhaps easier to do, and then there are risks. So I guess there is a big hope about these compliance reports that they at least remove some parts from the dark. and force the gatekeepers at least to state what they claim to be doing. And then the question will be, and you were particularly mentioning this anti-circumvention prohibition, possible attempts to circumvent, but I mean, that's of course also much easier said than done, because business model just change. And the question is, well, do they change because of certain interventions, or because of certain foreseen interventions, or do they just change because other facts on the ground change? So what are your views how this kind of anti-circumvention prohibition can be brought into practice? I mean, how should the Commission do? I mean, I can also then ask Sophie, but first start with Victoria with an outside view.
So as Alexandre said, I think those compliance reports are really important to see what the gatekeepers have done or what they will do, and how this will then mean that they are complying with their obligations, because that for us will enable accountability for staying within the DMA, hopefully. Now, of course, anti-circumvention will play a role, and what matters is that it's not just, like Cristina said, compliance on the letter of the law, but it's actual compliance with the spirit, perhaps, of the Digital Markets Act. Now, of course, we know that those companies, I mean, they're smart. Yeah, they didn't get to where they are now for no reason. And of course, they also know that if it looks like they're complying, but then they introduce little changes that mean they can still reap the benefits that they shouldn't reap anymore, this can be a problem. So they can introduce friction where there should be none. So for example, if the issue is, well, giving genuine choice to users, then they shouldn't put the choice in a way that users wouldn't actually make use of this possibility. So fonts will matter, font color will matter, phrasing matters a lot when you have user interaction. And in fact, the Dutch ACM has gathered quite some experience on this. And Martijn Snoep, if you want to look at the last stakeholder workshop, held a keynote on that, just sharing some of the experience that they have had, which I think can be very valuable to see what might be awaiting the Commission.
But so I agree with that. Okay, so fonts matter, color matters, behavioral stuff matters. Let's take a more serious position, which is, okay, so we want to give apps the choice of how they do the payment system on the store. Okay, and so there is a case in the Netherlands on this, and Apple turns around and says, well, do a margin squeeze on me. I've only got costs of doing payment that are, I don't know, 1-2%. I'll give you a discount of 3. You still pay me 27 because it isn't a free lunch. You can get your alternative payment without 3%. Good luck to you. But I'm not going to drop my charge because this is how I monetize. So this is what we are achieving. We're achieving perfectly zero because precisely 0 developers in the Netherlands have put forward an app with an alternative payment system, because this kind of thing doesn't create enough incentives, because ultimately, you know, we can delusion ourselves that we are doing stuff and it isn't going to matter. So I'm concerned that we are going to pat ourselves on the back and say, look, we've achieved this great success. Apple actually dropped their tax by 3% in the Netherlands and 4% here and 2% there. And in fact, it has no impact on the ground, none whatsoever. And what would be the impact, incidentally? Because suppose you have an open iOS in which you get a few app stores. Is that going to change the power of Apple in any meaningful way? Do we think that Apple will not be Apple in 10 years? Forget it. So this is what I question. I'm not saying we don't do it, but I'm saying also, let's not be so certain that what we're doing means anything, because some of it is a hype to nowhere. It doesn't change anything. That's the reality of it, seen from where I sit.
Thanks, Cristina. Yeah, let me perhaps get to Sophie, kind of you don't have to defend the commission. Also in the commission, okay, you can say the initiative came from the commission, but now it's there and you have to live with it. There is also perhaps a way of expectation management. So also at some point to see what the DMA can do and what it cannot do. And in a way, it also then provides possibly help to policymakers. And even though Alex doesn't like it, at some point when you think the outcomes are unsatisfactory and regulatory tools are, if they turn out to be ineffective, you may need some other tools. Sophie, what's your kind of view of moving forward? Also kind of what do you think, is there anything you can share with us? What are the kind of the easy targets where you kind of think really have some impact? And then what are the more difficult ones?
Yeah, so I think I cannot obviously quite share Christina's view and be so pessimistic in my position. I think the DMA is a starting point, and it's going to be a process rather than delivering contestability from day one. So yeah, indeed, expectation management is quite important because the DMA, I mean, the objective is not to break up dominant market structures. The objective is not to completely turn over the system as it is, obviously, yeah, because then the rules would have to be different. That's what Cristina is saying. I understand. But I think in the EU, we have quite a track record of starting something. Alexandre mentioned, for example, the regulation in financial services, financial supervision. This was started 10, 15 years ago now, and it has evolved. There is now, I think the third review of the single resolution mechanism regulation is underway. So this is a starting point, and there will be a DMA 2.0 at some point, and we will learn from this. So yeah, I have to be a bit more optimistic in the sense that I think it's at least we're doing more than, for example, the UK and the US right now.
I started by saying you are, but picture this scenario. There is a thing which is now called AI. Microsoft has got OpenAI, and Amazon has got Hugging Face, and Google has got what? And we're going to see the world of AI divided up and entrenched between these guys before we know where we are, before we even consider regulation in this sector. So we're just so sort of dealing with yesterday's world. No one cares about app stores. No one in tech is working on app stores. No one cares. Of course, there is a division of rent, and go ahead, by all means, take the money and redistribute it. But it isn't really what is going to make innovation contestability change.
But can I say two things on the success of the DMA? So the first is, in a way, for me, the Amazon settlement that was agreed in December is the first success of the DMA, because I'm pretty sure that Amazon will never have settled. No, Cristina, you may come back and say,
I was in the case, so I know.
But we don't know what it will lead to, but I think it's already a kind of success. No, maybe not a full success, and it will take time to. But I mean, Amazon will probably not have settled, and probably you know it better because I see it from the outside without the DMA. So that's the first thing. Now, on the new technology and whether the DMA is too short-sighted and so on, maybe, but you have a mechanism to update the obligation, and I think what the DMA is providing us is a direction, which is opening platform and data. So if your worry is that a few firms will control the technology, yes, maybe, but at least now, and before we didn't have that, we have a direction where Europe wants to go. So, I mean, I think Rome was not done in one day, as we say. So I think I mean, as you say, it's a process. So again, I don't know what could have been done better. I agree, it will be difficult. We have to involve technologists and so on. And if there are some people who are technologists, apply to the Commission because they are really looking for them. But I mean, we have a direction now that we didn't have last year.
Yeah, we need people who are technologists to talk to these companies, not just economists and lawyers. That is deadly. Yeah. The economists and the lawyers don't understand a thing that's going on other than the letter of the law and a few theories. We need the technologists to really be sitting in in the not having a written submission. Please, what is a technologist going to do? Write you some code? No, you need to talk. You need to be in the room. You need to have hundreds of people dealing with this stuff and understanding it. That is the only way forward, in my view.
What Mannheim is doing for that.
Well,
Are you training?
that's the point. We only have lawyers and economists, but perhaps one way of opening up, but also that technologists within the companies are starting to talk, and there have been a lot of closed doors being erected within the tech companies. So I think I'm not sure what the DMA can do about it, but in a way, what you would like to do ideally is to talk to these people inside who are technologists, who are not yet that indoctrinated. So they will tell you that their technology view, and don't think about too much.
I can assure you that we'll talk to whoever we need to talk to get to the bottom. I mean, that's actually what we have experience with in other instruments as well. In mergers and in antitrust, the commission has the power to get the information it needs, and it's as simple as that.
Yeah, but
and
you don't have the competences in terms of the technologists. That's what I'm saying. You have lots of lawyers and lots of great economists, but you don't have the technologists. And the point I'm making is, if you talk to the company's own technologists, their position is, am I going to allow a regulator who is not competent on technology to change my product? That is the total terror of an engineer or a technologist, because you think a regulator sitting in Brussels who's going to redesign my product technology for me is the greatest terror, is the thing you don't want to happen, and you will not allow to happen unless you have somebody competent on the other side who speaks your language, who is an engineer, who understands what you're doing. Speaking to a lawyer, with due respect, or an economist is a waste of time.
I can comfort you in that way, that we have actually hired quite a number of specialists that are not lawyers, that are engineers.
No, because I am the advocate of the DMA.
No, what I want to do, Alexandre, we are running close to the end. So what I want to do is now give everybody the opportunity for 1 minute. Victoria gets more than 1 minute because others were shouting more. So 1 minute, I move from Alexandre over to Sophie, and Sophie will have then the closing word.
No, just one thing. So I agree it will be a difficult adventure, but I mean, there is one thing I wanted to add is that next to the DMA, there is the DSA, which has a lot of transparency obligation. And so, at least it will be visible for everyone, and a possibility for the Commission to exchange those information with researchers, vetted researchers, because I understand many of you who are technologists maybe don't want to go to work at the Commission. Brussels is not really great as a city and so on. But I mean, you would have the possibility, there is a possibility for the Commission to rely on technologies from the outside, whether that would be enough or not, we will see. And at the end of the day, I think the success of the DMA will be seen whether we indeed disintermediate the big tech, which have become a sort of global intermediator today.
Victoria.
Great. So I think the DMA is and will be a group effort from the European Commission, from the national authorities, but also from private parties, as I tried to show. There's scope for that as well. And it'll depend on this group effort whether it can succeed and to what degree it can succeed. Now, of course, there will be pushback from the gatekeepers. There's no doubt about that if you follow the workshops, interventions, and so on. And of course, they can hire, lots of lawyers, economists, and engineers. But at the end of the day, I'm more optimistic about the DMA achieving some of its goals, some sooner, some later. More contestability in some of those markets. And I think that will make a difference to how digital markets are shaped.
Well, I mean, I don't think it will achieve contestability in any meaningful way. I don't think the entry that we will see will be meaningful. I don't think it will achieve anything, but I'll rest my case.
Sophie, you will have to prove Cristina wrong.
I think we have every intention to, and the team is super motivated by the challenges that lie ahead on the Comp and on the Connect side. And I think especially also the Connect expertise, on technology will play a role. And also we have a number of experts on, at hand, so to say, the chief economist team is there. We have the JRC with experts. So I think we have access to specialists. And of course, I think we rely on the public more than anything, and on academics as well, to do their part, discover things, share with us. And I mean, I know you're aware, there's histories of academic papers actually starting antitrust investigations. And so this is really helpful and valuable, I think, for us as a public authority to engage with academics and understand the research they've been doing and what they've been discovering and exploring.
So my closing word is that, despite of what Cristina said, please, as economists and lawyers, continue to think about these issues and try to acquire more expertise and work on the digital market regulation. Thanks to all the panelists. Thanks for being with us. I would have liked to open the floor to further questions, but there was so much emotion here up there so that I couldn't
Come on, it would have been too boring and one-sided if I hadn't said what I said.
No, it's not just you. I mean, Alexandre is as polarizing as you are. And if I could
I don't know how to take it.
And we have now prepared the ground well, I'm not sure the ground, but we will now move on to the second keynote. There's a 5-minute break, but it's really only a 5-minute break. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks to everybody.